Thanks to everybody for being here. This is designer vs. producer. I'm Zala, nice to meet you. I'm currently a game designer at Dinosaur Polo Club. I've been working in game design for just around 4 years, but I have a background in wider design from UX to interaction, education, and product design.
And I'm Calliope. I almost forgot my name for a second. I'm Calliope. I'm currently heading a tiny team of 2 in the production department at Wētā Workshop's Interactive Division. And we're working on the next Lord of the Rings game, which is super exciting. But I can't talk much about it yet, so that kind of sucks. I was really hoping we'd be able to share more by now so I could gloat a bit, but I'll hold off. But yeah, I've got a background sort of across lots of different platforms, from VR to AR to PC and various consoles. And I've worked sort of like as a producer person from the sort of more creative producer side, so being paid to do both like game art and game design as well, to even like the games financing side. So I've kind of got a wide scope of experience in a relatively short amount of time that we're bringing to this talk.
Yeah.
So what we're covering today. A lot of these words kind of look buzzwordy, but I swear they are sections that we're going to focus on. So a couple of caveats as well. We absolutely can't cover everything, obviously. It's only 50 minutes, and we could probably rant for a long time.
Forever.
We do both have ADHD, so we could rant for a really long time. And we're also both very tired.
It's true. Though we're coming at this from design and production.
Yep.
A lot of this will apply across other disciplines, so hopefully it's applicable to anybody in the room. So designer mindset versus producer mindset. These roles are really closely tied together, especially in pre-production and when you're just starting to figure things out. So just starting with an abstract of design and production outside of games. What do people think design is? Often people think of graphic design first thing, because it's visual, it's easy to remember. It's a subset of design. It's not the parent, it's not the mother design. Telling people what to do. Design is usually, well, it's always equal in the hierarchy of what you're doing. So regardless of the type of design, you're working alongside experts that you're designing for, right? Often people think it's kind of like more of a boss situation, which is not true. And then the ideas guy. Of course, we get to problem solve and come up with ideas and stuff. It's all good fun. But no, it's not the idea guy's role that people think it is from afar.
Oh, man.
So what? I know, sad. What is design, really? As a discipline, of course, design is a problem-solving role, but we don't just solve problems. We work out what the problem is that actually needs solving. So when a problem is presented, it's easy to cut corners and sort of jump to the initial problem, treating the symptom kind of a deal. But this often ends up creating more issues down the line, so you want to be really careful with, part of the design process is figuring out what it is you need to solve. So treat the source, not the symptom. You'll save yourself a lot of pain. And we're not just the user advocate, we're the human advocate, so this sounds a little bit, wishy-washy, but it's easy to forget that human, like an actual human being, is on the other side of the design, unless you're designing for like pets or something. So it's important that designers constantly consider the person at the other end. You hear a lot about user error or human error. While not all of these issues can be solved easily, the human error was for a reason with design. So the design's job is to figure out why and improve the system for the human.
And in the same vein, abstract about project management, not as specific to games. So production, as we know it, actually starts with project management because, surprise, games are projects. So people who project manage are often expected to wear a lot of hats, as I'm sure many of you are aware, especially in games. But we are not your therapist. We should be a good listening ear, and everyone should always feel very free to come up to us and air their concerns about the project. But I'm not here to deal with your childhood trauma. We're also not your mum, kind of same vein. Please don't ask me to set timers and alarms for you. You're a tax-paying adult. I expect you to do that yourself. And we're also not your lead, unless we are. But generally, I feel like a lot of the time, especially in games, it kind of gets conflated with a sort of like a boss role or like a people manager role. And we're actually here to manage the project, not the individuals. You will hopefully have your own leads who are managing your own personal growth and helping you get to the goals that you want to. That's not my job. More on project management. So our mindset is not as robotic as people often give us credit for. We do love a scope cut, but we're not here to make your project or your game or your dreams small. What we're really here for is purposeful and researched prioritization. We want to get the best from the team, we want to get the best for the project, and we want to do that without breaking any of the fragile bonds that bind the game development team or the game itself together. Project manager types are just trying to get the game done, which is also kind of can be challenging when you're working with creatives who want best. And sometimes best isn't done and done isn't best. So that's often where a lot of our friction comes from. And this is actually what my job looks like most of the time. Everyone's cats, and I'm racing across the desert trying to, yeah, it's about as chaotic as that is, like, honestly, a lot of the time.
I'm the cats.
Yeah. So yeah, in games we adjust these roles slightly, in some areas more than others. So game producers still have all the requirements of a project manager, with a lot of added bells and whistles. The role also isn't necessarily clearly defined, so I'm sure a lot of you will have heard, like, a producer at a specific company has a completely different set of responsibilities to a producer at another company. Seems to diverge more when you get into, like, AAA as well. So yeah, like development director versus publisher and producer, pretty different skill sets and roles, but everyone's welcome here, and hopefully this applies to most of you anyway. Basically, you know, no matter what the defined role is, we're all prioritizing, balancing priorities to ensure that the player and the team and the stakeholders, obviously, get the best outcome. So indie teams might value project management training slightly less, and you know, value more of like a wider games background, whereas AAA might value your background in games less. I feel like in ANZ in particular, the real shame is that I don't feel like we value the skill of project management as highly as we should. There's a lot required of producers, and I feel like sometimes we just see them as, you know, organizer mum role. Makes me sad.
So, much like production, game design is fairly undefined. I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked what a game designer does, and really it depends. It changes with scope, team size, how many designers you have, and often production style. But very broadly, game designers design holistic and individual elements of the game to suit the player needs, the human needs. Harken back. It's our job to consider every element and how that knock-on effect meets the player at the other end. It's easy to dive into the stuff that you want and what would be super cool and the best thing ever, but it's always crucial that you come back to what meets the player at the other end, because even invisible designs, all of it is for the player.
So yeah, obviously we're coming at game dev from pretty different directions, so we just want to talk about, you know, the individual's goals as well, and sort of get a good basis of where each side's coming from.
So, designers' goals can be pretty lofty and outlandish. We're just a bit of a bunch of dreamers, really. But overall, the goal is to ship a game that the player loves. We really focus on the love part. It's easy to forget about the ship part. We want to create a game that delivers. By this, I kind of mean delivers on the promise of, like, the store page, you know, the marketing. A huge part of this is making sure that the design meets the player's expectations when they buy the game. An incredible game that doesn't match the marketing promise is only half as good, really. We want to make an intuitive and fun experience, and how intuitive something is really ties into the above point. Expectation is a big part of intuition, and of course, we want it to be fun, always. And we all know the perfect design is never done. I'm going forever, I could work on this forever. So really the goal is to use every second handed to us to puzzle out the best iteration of each element. Making the best design of all time may not be realistic, but you can design to your absolute best with the time that you do have.
And then producer goals, at least from my point of view, but probably pretty universal, is obviously ship a quality game on time and on budget. Quality is the one that we definitely agree on. And then the next one that I think is probably up there for us is risks. So foreseeing, assessing, mitigating risks. We spend a lot of time and energy looking for smoke and finding it, and hate surprises. Please don't surprise us with your features. Don't go off and develop something in a corner and then spring it on me. We're here to protect the team and protect the product. We're a fierce advocate for our teams behind closed doors, especially to the suits, so it makes us really sad when you call us suits, because they don't see us as suits either. And for iteration, you know, we really need to keep tabs on those iterations, because as much as we, you know, respect the design process and, you know, iterating things to its most perfect perfect, perfect goal, we need to keep an eye on it and make sure that it's still delivering what we promised to sponsors. And for the product, so again, player advocacy. We need to constantly be a player advocate and ensure that we're building a really cohesive product that delivers on what we promised. This one kind of overlaps with design, obviously, but designers can start to be too clever, and producers have to remind them of, what kind of people what we're developing for. Basically, designers want plenty of time to just noodle on making their design the best thing ever. And producers actually want to get something out the door, but may not understand the critical importance of a certain feature or a certain design choice. So it's definitely a good idea to start communicating constantly. I would say that my most fierce debates,
Friendly
conversations are with my lead designer. We will often go off into a room for like 2 hours and hash something out. So let's work on how to make that better.
In the end, we have the same goal, shipped enjoyable game, always. Keep that in your brain.
So let's talk pipelines. Nothing I love more than a good pipeline. Basically, there's two types of people in this talk. There's a designer and a producer. We have different processes and pipelines, particularly in how we structure our work and the way that we find our solutions and the way that we make decisions.
Yeah, the best we can do really is to understand each other's ideal process, how we work, and then support from our own side. We're going to break down stages in development to show design's role in production and production's role in design.
So at a macro level, this starts at the very beginning in pre-production. So shared means that you'll have a representative from every discipline, of your team at the table when you're first going through your road mapping process. This should create a shared understanding that everyone on the team understands the intention of the game, understands the intention of the features that you're building within the game, and no one's expecting full technical documents at this point, obviously. But we just want to know kind of what level of depth that we're talking about when we reference a feature. What kind of scope we're considering for the stuff that we're building, because, more on that next. And with swag, so that's our scientific wild ass guesstimates. With that understanding, you can be a little bit more specific and be a little bit better with the guesstimations for the whole team, not just for design and production, but everyone can give you better estimates on your roadmaps if the intention and the size and the scale is better understood across the team.
Yeah. So with those time frame estimates in a roadmap, we need to develop accordingly. Meaning that if we have 3 months for a feature, a roadmap accounts for how long other departments have been allocated as well, and scoping those designs to fit alongside development time. So this ratio scoping is huge. Huge to the design process, since the last thing you want to do is spend all of your time on one part of the design and then have to rush the rest. Designs by nature is a consideration of all the elements, so if you put a month into the wrong ratio of design time, it'll often be worse than if you put like a week into the correct ratio.
And roadmaps, it can look like, this much time to build thing, but like this much is design, this much is iteration, and this much is like finishing building it. So yeah,
it's kind of a
looks to be
one.
deceiving.
It's good fun.
So as they come up, we'll be starting to get a little bit more specific with the features. Testing them out, iterating, starting to massage them into the best possible outcomes. So interestingly, if you look at these two roles, there's a lot of overlap. Production inherently takes on some of design's priorities, especially around player needs and also their communication with marketing around player needs. And design inherently also needs to project manage their own time. So at a feature level, or even when we're talking about a large body of work, producers need to provide clarity on feature deadlines. Now, obviously, this is the most important one, but it's one that gets screwed up pretty often because you can sort of start to communicate the wiggle rooms and things, and then everything sort of falls apart as people keep developing towards the furthest point that they can. We also need to provide transparency around potential changes as much as you can. So letting people know when things are if people are likely to move out or come back in, providing transparency around where you have wiggle room and where you have potential resource shifts as well can really help make sure that the design team has the best amount of information possible so that they can develop accordingly. And then prioritizing resources to maximize your impactful features. So whatever your sort of maximum impact features are on your game, because you'll have some that are way more important than others, we want to center and focus our resources there as much as possible.
And design's primary responsibility in this planning stage is to break down at a very high level what this feature looks like. So that means projected feature scope, a rough block out of how long each element will take to design and implement. You have to work with other teams here, because I don't know how long something's going to take to code, right? And you need to project how much design time you'll actually have. It's easy to think that the feature deadline is the design deadline, because in your heart and soul you kind of want it to be.
Don't do it to me.
Yeah. But these design deadlines need to be built alongside production to ensure that other departments have the time to develop the finalized design. You also want to be clear from the get-go as to which elements are crucial and which are more happy to be on the chopping block. This will change, very often it'll change, but at each stage it should remain clear. So whenever it changes, that needs to be discussed. And accepting that cuts are a possibility from the start will help you. It'll help you emotionally. It'll help you in so many ways. It'll help you design around the potential cuts. So if you know that something might go, it'll help to know that maybe if it goes, it's not going to completely screw up everything else. And it will save your feelings later if it is bent in the end. So at a sprint level process here doesn't mean just one sprint. It means thinking on a sprint-to-sprint basis. So whether your sprint is 2 weeks or 4 weeks, it's easy to let work, especially design work, bleed through sprints without noticing. That makes defining outcomes really, really important. For each sprint goal and task within it, you want to work with production to make sure that those goals are in line with feature priorities and achievable within the sprint. Or if you know it's not achievable, and you break it down. Speaking of achievable, make sure you look at least one sprint ahead to be able to communicate potential needs and blockers for the next sprint's tasks to allow production to have the current sprint to make sure that it's tackled. If you leave it until the sprint that it's required, it may be a lot less possible to solve, and your producer won't be very happy about it.
So yeah, and for the producer, you want to keep tabs during the sprints, obviously, like standard, as well as all of your other production tasks during sprints, which we're not covering right now. And try and adjust resources and people around those communicated blockages as you go, which is basically just a big old game of Tetris. We know how it is. Keeping a clear understanding of kind of like what the problem is that you're trying to solve is really important here, rather than trying to shove the first option at it. And you want to ensure that the outcomes are on par with where you need to be in that time allocated for that feature. So, kind of looking at the overall feature and figuring out, like, okay, is this a reasonable outcome, or do we actually need to skip forward and move on to something more important? So yeah, you're constantly comparing against the big picture roadmap. And you'll probably have noticed that there's micro check-ins in both, because that's both of us thing. I'm referring to like non-agile ritual check-ins about how features are progressing, because yeah, you need them.
You need them. This is huge. You want to make sure that you're clear across departments and avoid wasted design time, because you really don't want to spend too long designing down the wrong path.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that.
So let's recap. So at a macro level, at pre-prod, everyone needs to be creating that roadmap together. Don't leave anyone out of that process.
At a feature level, designers break down their work process for each feature relative to the time allowed and time available in other departments. Feature complete means feature complete.
Done, hands off.
Done.
No
Gone.
touch.
Dual check-ins, so to make sure that design changes and updates as well as production updates are clear as they can be across all departments.
Yeah. And obviously this is all, assuming that Agile fits into your dev process, which I'm assuming for a reason. Use your sprint reviews to keep cross-referencing against the roadmap. And yeah, constantly review and adjust as you go.
Communication.
Da-na-na-na.
It is really closely tied with pipeline, but here we'll get a little more granular onto how we want to achieve it all. And tips and tricks.
So, one in the clouds, one in the ground, run in opposite directions, but towards the same goal. Of course, this is going to be the most photographed slide, isn't it? I said PP on it. Scope friction usually occurs basically because two different people have a different idea of what the same word means. That word might be combat, or it might be customization. But basically, you have to get really clear early on to avoid disappointment and friction further down the line in production. Zala and I had some pretty long discussions about where our pain points were and what's worked in the past to avoid it. And basically,
we eventually realized, and when going back and forth, the largest culprit was misunderstandings around deadlines and acceptance criteria, what complete means. So starting at the big picture, project road mapping, down to the daily, we're going to talk to you about how you can keep those shared understandings communicated and clear.
Yeah, so it's really important that we're on the same page. I always think that the definition of done is really obvious and clear. I'm like, it's right there, it's in the documents. Why aren't you looking at it? It's obvious, it's right there.
Did you mean done though, or?
Exactly. Did you mean, like, you meant that kind of done? Or you meant like prototype done?
You just want a document, right?
Yeah. So yeah, design is in charge of directing a lot of the work within the dev team, whereas production is obviously in charge of communicating a lot of that work outwards to people funding the damn thing. And more. So if we start to diverge, we're going to be communicating a very different product from the one that's actually getting made, and no one likes that. Definitely no one likes that. So obviously, you know, if you're a producer, you probably know this, but production communicates outwards, right, as well as generally inwards, and that means publishers, IP licenses, you know, localization, external user testing, marketing stakeholders, press. There's a lot more that I wanted to list, but it wouldn't fit, and I, you know, don't want to give you a wall of text. But yeah, we need to make sure that we have the actual understanding of what's being made when we communicate outwards.
That's a big old list. So while production also communicates to the dev team, design communicates more granular aspects a little more often. So we communicate with production, huge. Within design, so all the design teams, UX, UI, all fields of design, narrative, story, world building, code, art, animation, cinematics, all of the much of art, audio, sound design, composition, voice acting, QA, lots of communication with QA. Basically just the entire dev team. So making sure that design and production have a shared understanding of what's being made at every stage is huge, so that the higher-ups expect the game that we're actually making.
Yeah, done that before.
So, roadmap level, pre-prod. This early, it is a challenge to define acceptance criteria. Something that helps with this is creating a high-level core reference document to communicate easily throughout the production process. It's impossible to know the design right off the bat, but if you keep this document updated throughout development, it will help to keep people on the same page. And just to be clear, this is not the game design document. Also, very important document. This is another document. This is a high-level breakdown document highlighting each element of the game in a short, easy-to-reference format.
And obviously, you know, create your milestone acceptance criteria. So by milestones, I mean, you know, point that you usually hand something off, hopefully get some money from if you have a publisher. If you don't, I'm kind of jealous. You've just got an endless money train. But basically, we need to make it really clear and specific for us internally. And, you know, if you can get away with it, maybe be a little bit more vague from the publisher side so that, you know, if you need to adjust things or change things, as you may, as you find that some things are more useful than others, so that you can actually, you know, wiggle that around a bit, massage it. Producers also need to ask all of the questions at this point to try and get a full picture of what this feature is meant to be. The only comment I can make about this is find out now or cry later.
Same goes for design side. Maybe not, maybe the crying thing as well.
Always crying. It's game
always
dev.
crying.
Always crying.
Sometimes producer speak could go in one ear and out the other. So if you have any clarification questions on deadlines or what a deadline means, now is the time to ask. And communicate resource requirements early. This one is also with the full team, not just design. But getting this clear will help everyone understand what resource requirements are likely to look like so we can hire early and hit that acceptance criteria.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of rehashing what we said before on a more granular level, but basically we're trying to get the intention of all of the aspects of the game as clear as possible now so that there's no huge surprises around how scopy things are later. So, just as a heads up, so feature here is referencing like a large body of work or an epic, whatever lingo you use at your place. Anything that like requires design things in this context. So together you set and agree on the necessary outcomes of a feature so that you're both really clear on what done actually means. And this one I feel like you can think that you have agreed on it, but you actually haven't, and everyone still has that different idea of what something means in your head, so really nail it down. Now next up is Moscow, and this kind of also helps with that, like making sure that everyone's on the same page. You know, your must have, should have, could have, won't have. I like having a nice to have section because it feels a little bit luxurious. But the earlier that you can document this, the earlier that you're going to know what your minimum requirements are. And that means that everyone will understand, you know, that if things get squished down, if they spend more time in another area, they know ahead of time what they're sacrificing from other features that they probably are very attached to and love. And again, it's setting the expectations for feelings getting hurt early on.
So you want to set feature functional requirements. This essentially means user stories. Kind of depends on how you roll. These get broken down a lot more as you develop functional requirements more specifically at a sprint level. But making sure everything is covered at a high level at this stage is important so that nothing gets overlooked. And feature level core reference document. This is very similar to the previous high level reference document, but for features. You want a document for the feature you're working on from the very beginning, and keep it updated as things change. This, again, should be easy to update, easy to read. Design team will likely reference the GDD, more granular documents more often, but these core reference documents are for the whole team to easily check in.
It means if I'm talking to marketing, I should be able to pull up that document and understand.
And at a sprint level, things start to get a bit hectic. Design by nature fluctuates, so plans need to be consistently iterated on sprint by sprint. And that's not an issue, as long as you plan for it.
So again, sprint planning, you're breaking down any huge parent user stories that you may have crafted when you're talking about your features together, and you're trying to break those down to smaller ones that are actually sprint achievable. Again, making sure that you agree on acceptance criteria. Get the dev team, well, this is what I like to do. I like to get the dev team to write the definition of done in their own things. Firstly, because self-organizing teams, it's an agile principle. But secondly, it's very clear to me if they don't understand if they don't know where they're going, or if they don't understand the acceptance criteria from the way that they've written what the definition of done is in a task. So it's really good for me because it gives me a heads up that I actually need to step in. But it's also good for them because it gives them the autonomy to be, crafting their own tasks, and also the responsibility to go and find the documents and make sure they're on the right track.
So stand-ups?
Stand-ups.
Standing ups are your best friend. This is the easiest time to flag blockers and upcoming needs without creating a separate meeting, because booking time with your producer is not very easy.
Yeah, good luck.
Best of luck. So communicate acceptance criteria progress. This, if you define on how you're working, like in stand-ups based off of acceptance criteria, that gives the whole team an easier review of how things are tracking and easier to reference in your sprint board.
Yeah. Everyone's going to get really sick of the term acceptance criteria by the end of this talk. I'm not sorry. It's going to be embedded in your brain. So for reviews and retros, different things usually happen in the same meeting, depending on your company. But you want to review those sprint outcomes together and be kind of brutal about whether things were met or not met. Again, that's going to make your team, it's going to give them a lot more power when they're creating their own definitions of done and writing up their own tasks. Communicating external information and updates. So if you don't have another sort of meeting that is an appropriate time to communicate this stuff, like a team wrap or something, this is a good time to give the full team an update of anything that's come from the publishers or any other external places. Having transparency across the board means that the design, but whole team, will be aware of stresses that you're under as well. I feel like a really good quote I heard was that producers are like umbrellas, so the team should be able to see when it's raining, but they shouldn't be getting wet from stress, if that makes sense.
And lastly, recap core design documents. I'm going to keep talking about documentation. Use the reviews and retros to cover any big changes. Sometimes people just don't have time to check documents. That's fine. So it's good to have a set time to just give a quick update on the really big things. Documents. Core documents are useless the moment they're outdated. They are sometimes more detrimental than no document. So keep those documents living.
I love you for this. Ad hoc comms. So even with all those stopgaps, shit happens, stuff doesn't get passed on, people are still left in the dark about things. Cascading communication is definitely not bulletproof. People go away, things happen. So having multiple methods of communication and the way that communications flows is really important to make sure that everyone receives it. I don't mean have different sources of truth. Please do not do that. You want to have one source of truth on everything, but you want to make sure that there are a myriad of ways that people can access that information if possible. Especially important for accessibility, both for remote workers and for teams with neurodivergent folks like us, because we pass information differently.
So some day-to-day tips. This is a very cut-down version. Just a couple ideas. Automate notifications. So whatever software you're using, automate them. This is a little difficult because depending on the team member, you want different notifications. But in particular, because this is designer versus producer, make sure your producer has notifications about the core reference documents. That way they don't need to make time to check it. It'll just pop in their face. And you thought I was done talking about documents. No. keep the documents easy to pass. If information is easily accessible for the team, especially production, that will save everyone a lot of time. And again, if they're not up to date, they are not useful. Meetings channel. So this is useful for, it can get chaotic with bigger and bigger teams, but just in Slack or Discord or whatever you use, something for after each meeting, a couple bullet points of the takeaways and the overviews so that people don't need to be in every single meeting and thing doesn't get lost.
Or they don't have to pay attention to every single other channel.
You don't have to, exactly. And this is also huge for remote people or anyone not kicking around the office, if someone's sick, any of that. And text meetings. So this is just quick catch-ups. If it's something that's like really just a usual catch-up and it doesn't need to be too specific or in-depth or a discussion, you can just have meetings at your desks, just set a time to be at your desk and in the meeting, and it's just a couple texts and it's easy peasy. So this is accessible for some people, really accessible for some people, and really not accessible for other people. So just remember who you're meeting with and take that all into account.
Option. Also, just on the meetings channel, as we were discussing this, I actually implemented the meetings channel at work. We didn't have that before. We just had sort of like a general channel for some stuff, but we didn't have sort of like outcomes of like meeting discussions that everyone needed to know. We didn't have them in one place. It was all split into the feature that it was meant to be sitting in. And it's actually been a game changer. I've had so many people like really appreciate it and really like it, because it means that instead of like, you know, trying to find information, like trying to find that key core information, like really important stuff through an entire channel where people are like noodling and like responding in threads about, you know, different aspects of like, okay, I can't think of anything specific without like, without breaking NDAs. But you know what I mean, without like, you know, going through a whole lot of stuff. So keeping that, that meetings channel and just having some bullet points about, hey, in the game, we're now not going to use this color red. And then everyone knows. It's great. Oh yeah.
Meeting etiquette.
Not baby time. We're not talking about being punctual.
This is,
you're an adult.
Meeting etiquette could be long, but this is just a couple of things that we have identified as like contention points. So if you're presenting, have agendas and outcomes. I know there's not always time, but just 5 minutes beforehand, slap some stuff out, extra points if you get it a day early and get other people to put things into the agenda. Bonus. Use game glossary terms to avoid clarification. So if someone says main menu, and that could mean 3 things, make sure that these all have specific terms that can be referenced in meetings and spoken to. That'll happen throughout design, but it's very important to stick to those terms to avoid confusion. And ask for feedback and questions throughout. So if you have a time, like a little moment after you're done with your piece or halfway through or whatever it is you're talking about, if you have a moment for that and that becomes a habit, then that'll avoid interruptions and it'll be really useful for people to be able to save things, ask, and answer.
Yeah, people will feel safe knowing that they don't have to interrupt. So for attending, which I'm kind of assuming is from my perspective, from a producer perspective, I'm imagining this is a design document overview or presentation. Don't derail. Write down your talking points. This is the hardest one for me because I constantly like get freaked out whenever I see someone presenting this like up in the clouds, like amazing scopy thing, and I'm like, oh my god, this alone could be 3 years of development. What are you talking about? So it can be really difficult, but try really hard not to jump in and cut someone down, not shit on someone's dreams. You have to resist this, and be really transparent about the potential roadblocks, because what I'm sort of like getting at with this one is that when someone presents their huge scopy design to you, if you are transparent about the roadblocks to their success in that feature, whether it's resourcing or whether it's a specific area that you can sort of see for a producer, obviously the thing that is going to like blow out scope is the thing that you're like hyper focused on. It's the only thing that you can see in the wide picture. But for the designer, that might be a really small part of what they're trying to achieve or like what their intention is. So if you're really transparent about where those roadblocks occur, then the designer can be, might, not always, sometimes, yeah, the designer might be like, that's really, actually I have 3 different ideas of how to solve that problem and fill that in without, causing 3 years of production to be added onto the roadmap. And also just be mindful of who's presenting. I feel like this one's kind of obvious, but give space to juniors. If you do have high-level feedback that is, potentially a little bit cutting, give it to the lead to pass on, because their lead is there to, support their growth, as I mentioned before. And we really just want to be mindful in the way that we're communicating, because we don't want to contradict anything that someone's lead is guiding them through, or maybe presenting to a producer even though they're not ready yet is like part of their growth development plan or whatever. So just know your audience. So, in conclusion, man, we talked fast, but
we went through it. We
hell
sped
yeah.
through it.
So in conclusion, what we're really kind of getting to here is just like communicate. So from roadmap to user story, you need to be really clear, and everyone needs to understand what success looks like. And the biggest trip up there is that you might think that everyone understands. Often they don't, so keep checking in.
Converge, this sounds like communication, but it's not. Frequently touch base and assess and discuss progress, just to make sure, this is part documentation, part meetings, make sure that people know where you're at every point, because production has things that need to happen, design has things that need to happen, and they can be so happily married. Maybe. They can be. They can be.
They can be.
Live the dream.
Yep, and cooperate. So basically the main thing that I want to sort of, one of the main things that I really want everyone to understand, or like to get my point of view of coming out of this, is that the most critical thing that we can each do is understand how the other works, and understand the other person's process, or the other dev team's process, and then provide the best environment for everyone to succeed, right? Because, rising tide raises all boats, something like that. And the idea is that, the more that we can, what do you call it when you predict something? The more we can predict. Yeah. The more that we can predict the other person's needs ahead of them actually voicing it to us, and the more that we can understand and foresee where they're going to need help and assistance, the better we're all going to get along, and the better we're all going to work together, and it's going to become a really lovely, cohesive game team product. And obviously, remember that we all do have the same goal. So when you want to wring your designer's neck or your producer's neck, remember that the goal is still the same.
Shipped. Enjoyable. Game.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us. It's been really nice coming back to Melbourne. We're really thrilled to actually get to cross the ditch again.
We're a couple of Wellingtonians. So.
Yep. And you can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you want to chat to us there, you're more than welcome. This was definitely sort of like our chaotic back and forth conversations that we have late at night presented to you all. So I hope that you took something useful away from it.
Easy to pass.
Yeah.
Like the documentation.
Yeah. Exactly. And we do have a little bit of time now, so I'm just going to see if anyone has any questions before I close up and run away to get a beer.
We've got a mic coming up as well, as I understand it.
We can just line up if they have any questions.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, sure.
Should we
Absolutely.
Probably good for the recording.
Hi, fantastic. Thanks for the talk. On the acceptance criteria, just technical detail on how much detail you actually tend to put in your acceptance criteria at the different levels, and do you use like formatting, like the Gherkin formatting, what it's called, like the given when then, or dot points, or is it just more important to have something written down? Is it the detail? And is there too much detail you can put in the acceptance where people don't read it, or just any sort of thoughts on exactly how much detail you go into any of your acceptance criteria?
You're right if I do something?
Yeah.
So, I mean, too much would be like the entire design document. And I'm not sort of married to any specific methods. Like for me, the important aspect is that it's enough for each level. So for a feature, it's going to be like quite simple and quite broad strokes, but it should just clearly give an idea of what the player is going to experience. And then the further down you get, like the further you get into like user story stuff, it's going to be really like functional requirement, non-functional requirement. User or player can do X, Y, and Z. Player can access menu through this. Like at that level, I'm expecting pretty specific, granular levels of detail. Did that kind of answer your question? Yeah. But basically, like I prefer to kind of keep things like a lot looser in the way that it's structured at the top, and then get really like technically specific the further down the chain we get. Because often, like the larger it is, if we start to get really anal, don't know a better word for that right now, the more anal that we get up the top, the less sort of like breathing space it leaves for design and for the whole team as well. So the idea is just to get the intention nailed. I don't really care the method of writing it.
Yeah, I think for design, like in regards to too specific or too vague, it is a little weird because you kind of want it to be vague enough, so it should get the intention across, but it shouldn't have any like unnecessary decisions that are really a design decision. So it's not like you're gonna have this menu and it'll be pink or something. So there's a kind of water to tread a little bit, but that's more on a sort of a sprint level basis.
Yeah, I've definitely made the mistake of writing functional requirements for people if I was a bit frustrated and not doing it with them, or like writing it for them and then getting a slap on the wrist and getting corrected and finding out that I did not understand what that feature was meant to be doing in the way that I thought I did. So,
Me too, I've fallen that trap as well. So.
yeah, I'm like, I got this. Functional requirement number 1. Shit. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you.
Hey.
That was great. I'm a designer. I'm here with my wonderful producer. We're best friends.
Hell yeah.
My question is to do with iteration, because in an ideal world, we write acceptance criteria, we deliver those within a sprint. It's perfect. We never touch the feature again. But
Oh my
we
God,
don't
love it.
live
Has that
in
ever
world.
actually happened to you?
No, never.
No, okay.
So yeah, my question
about
is
to say, what
iteration and
world?
how you factor that in when you're writing the acceptance criteria, but also just in terms of sprint planning, roadmap. Do you tend to have like a phase 1, phase 2 on the roadmap, or do you try to do your iteration within a sprint, or do you have other methodologies?
I've got a little design side guy for
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
and then I think, the producer side. But from my side, it does change per areas, whether it's feature level roadmap. The roadmap is very much like production land, and you're there to inform. For breaking down features, it's difficult to be, like you said, it's very difficult to be specific because you're just about to design it. But that's why the updating of this document is kind of like you get to bring it with you. You don't want to stray too far, but having a rough breakdown and you really want to predict more time than you actually think it'll take to design certain things and iterate on it and give this a go and give that a go, and make sure that you have coders or artists or whenever you need. So it is a little strange in that respect. I think the user stories are really huge because your functional requirements become more of a, player wants to move the character. And you might not know exactly how the character is going to move, but you know that once that's done, the player needs to be able to move the character. So these user stories can be really, really useful in that. And then breaking down sprint tasks, design side, in that kind of format really helps as well. And it also depends on who's designing, whether it's the lead or like a junior. Sometimes you want to change that, right?
So just sort of like specifically answer part of that question. For a sprint, I don't expect the requirements to change at all, right? So if someone is, unless the goal becomes non-applicable, the goal often kind of sounds like a user story or is a user story depending. I expect you to follow that through, even if halfway through you're like, actually, I don't know if I really like this as much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Finish it, right? Because we need to be able to, that was the goal. We want to try it out. That's why we have only 2 weeks of risk associated. That's why we have 2-week sprints to make sure that when we try something out, we get to that point we can test it. The functional requirements really shouldn't change for those ones. For the larger ones, that's kind of like harkens back to what I was saying about being vague. Sounds bad.
Be vague.
Or being big picture, right?
Yes.
Because like what you were saying, the feature might be that the feature might be player customization. And you might have within that the acceptance criteria that player can change the pants, hat, jacket, skin color, right? So you have those ones, but then the how, or the kind of like, does that also change like your features? Like if you change skin color, does that change the features of the model? Or like when you change like how many different kinds of pants, are we going to have things overlapping or underlapping? Like are we going to have, like what kind of meshes are we going to be able to swap between? Like how does that work?
Do glasses count as hats? One of those moments.
Our backpacks, coats, whatever, right? So you're more thinking about it from a player desires angle at that point. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Because you're right. Iteration forever.
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's going to happen.
Worthwhile.
Thank you. That was an excellent talk. I've got a question that might be tricky to answer, but I'll give it a shot. So I run production for a team that is all online, working in different time zones, working remotely, and they all have different amounts of time they contribute to the project.
Oh my God, you're doing this on
and
hard mode.
I've been running this for years, and I keep refining it, and that's why I'll ask because I'm always looking for ways to refine this process. In your experience managing team members remotely, especially ones working at different times or just remote, what have you found has worked really well for you?
So we don't have as much of, at Wētā at least, we don't have as much of the issue of many different time zones. We have a couple of different time zones, but they're either Australia, so it's less of a big deal. Well, this side of Australia, so it's less of a big deal. Obviously, Perth would be a bit more complicated. Or it's like, you know, someone who is supporting in a much more contracting way, so we don't need to have that constant communication. So I really can't offer any advice to the time zone one that I would feel like I have an authority on, really.
Okay.
But from the hybrid perspective, the things that we found really helped, well, the sort of like in-person / remote thing is using a video conference method that has both faces and sharing screen availability. So for instance, Slack doesn't do that. If you start sharing your screen, your face disappears, I think it's that. I might be mixing them up. But having something where you can see face and screen so that you can more easily read people's expressions and see what's going on. Making sure that you are, you know, like that you're sort of like living in a space and having having things like remote team wraps or like, you know, remote look at the puppies that we saw this week, where like everyone's like taking photos, you know, like everyone's sharing what's going on in their environment. And with the sort of like different workloads and stuff, just being really specific and clear. So for instance, if you're on Slack, being really clear that like this time is, you know, this is my out of office time, this is my in office time, and never the twain shall meet. Here's when I'm available, here's when I'm not. And like occasionally, if they can, if it's okay, I mean, I'm really hoping that it is okay that there's at least some point at which you've got a bit of crossover. Having team meetings together as much as you can really helps build that camaraderie and also just like eases a lot of the communication issues that you can have. But yeah, you are playing this on hard mode, dude. That's rough.
Yeah. I find across the different time zones because it's really hard to get everyone in the same place. I usually end up having to have multiple meetings, sometimes at ridiculous times. And I take that as like, okay, yep, I'm running this team, so that's my responsibility. So I'll just do it. But in terms of, crap, I did follow up. It was good, but I think
Come
I
chat
lost
to
it.
me
Okay,
later.
I'll come chat to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Thank you very much.
I would be very interested in what you found works as well, because I definitely don't have as much of a tricky situation as you do.
Oh, and just to add further craziness to it, I originally specialized as a designer because that came naturally. But because this project got kind of crazy out of scope because it was very big, production lessons were kind of smashed into me, and I specialized as a producer to overcome a lot of those problems. So yeah,
Why not?
have an interesting chat with both of you really from different perspectives.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry that I'm getting the ding ding
Should we have
ding.
one more question?
All right. Sorry. Yeah.
Is that
Just
all right?
One more. Can I have one more?
Is that okay?
Cool.
Yeah. Thank
Sorry.
you very much.
Come back.
Sorry, I feel like you were standing there for so long.
Oh, sorry. Thanks for the great talk. Have you had any experience or know of anyone who's taken a designer producer hybrid role, especially in smaller teams?
Yeah, me. My last studio. Yeah.
Well, I haven't, but I do know people, yeah. It happens pretty often, I think, with small teams, especially like you'll meet so many designers like in universities or like 5-person projects or like post-uni, little indie, so many designers that end up being production. I think part of that is because production is undervalued because
People like, just
I couldn't do this job. Let's be real, I couldn't do production. There's so much going on. But I think because they overlap enough in work styles, I think it is actually quite a natural thing to share. So if you wanted to do both, or if somebody wanted to do both, I think that's totally possible, yeah.
It's possible. The sacrifice that you make is basically when you have the creative head and the project management and the like logistics head as the same person, that person just constantly has a war inside their head all the time between, I want this big thing, but I'm meant to be kind of like, it's a tough place for that person to be in psychologically because they have two warring priorities that they just can't fulfill. So you're constantly like split into two people.
Definitely got internal conflict a lot. I found splitting them into 2 separate personas.
Yeah.
helps me a lot. Confuses the crap out of people in an actual studio, but works well.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but it can be done, basically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Ready.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Beautiful.